Welcome back, true believers and all you merry Marvelites, to another very interesting episode of Marvel's Avengers 101. So I'm just gonna cut right to the chase within this video because there is a lot of new information which has been revealed recently, which I do find pretty important. And essentially, if you do manage to recall, there were a total of 2 separate gaming conventions happening at the exact same time from October 30th to November 3rd. One of which was the Paris Games Week convention, where we did actually end up receiving the really in-depth overview video along with the other gaming convention of Luca Comics and Games. And while the recent overview video did do a pretty good job recapping everything that we already know about Marvel's Avengers while splicing in some new pieces of footage in there, this recent interview from Luca Comics and Games does do a pretty good job of highlighting some new pieces of information that we may not know about as of right now, coming directly from Scott Amos himself. And while the article does do a pretty good job of going over the players' impressions as to getting their hands on Kamala Khan within a behind closed doors demo, I'm mainly going to go over the primary highlights of this article instead that do come from Scott Amos discussing some newer aspects about the game. I also want to give a quick shout out to another content creator on YouTube by the name of Hannah, who did actually get to do a private interview with Scott Amos while also showcasing some new bits of footage of Marvel's Avengers in her video. So if you want to personally know about Hannah's own hands-on impressions with Marvel's Avengers, I will leave a link to her video as well as all of her other social media links within the description below. So it is always cool to get some new pieces of footage of Marvel's Avengers in action, although this does make me a bit more confused and a little bit agitated as to why this footage wasn't included within the overview video. And seeing how this footage does showcase a bit more of the hub worlds that you can explore, I am hoping that we do get a lot more information about that relatively soon. But as for the interview itself, one of the main questions that the interviewer asks to Scott Amos, which I do find a bit interesting even though it is short and sweet, is whether or not there is going to be a lock-on system within the game. And as a relatively quick reply, Scott Amos says, "No, not at the moment. It is a mechanic that many are asking of us, and we also think it could be useful. We hope to be able to include it later." So that was actually one of the concerns from people who were actually able to play the demo for themselves, is whether or not you could lock onto enemies if you do want to in order to be more precise with your combat moves. And given how they're seemingly going to actually add in that feature by the time the game releases, just makes me a bit happier. Especially if you're in a co-op setting with 3 other players and a plethora of enemies on screen, you're definitely going to want to specify as to which enemy you're wanting to take down first. And seeing how they're directly responding to fan feedback just makes me a bit more confident as to what the final product could possibly turn into. Now moving on with the interview itself, the next question actually relates to a specific aspect of the game's story, which is pretty important, and of course that does in fact relate to the villains. And as the interviewer states, "Can you tell us a little about the antagonists?" And as Scott replies, "Well, AIM believes in science, not superpowers, so they use technology to increase the potential of human beings. In the game, there will also be known faces, such as the aforementioned Taskmaster or Abomination. You will know more in the coming months." So yes, given what Square Enix has decided to tell us already, is that AIM will in fact be the quote-unquote main antagonist of the game, while also seeing some other villains pop up so far with that of Taskmaster and Abomination. However, I do find it a bit relieving that we will be able to learn more about other antagonists that will show up within this game within the coming months before the game releases. And whether or not that means we'll end up seeing characters like the Dark Avengers or Hydra, I don't know for sure, but I'm just very interested to see which other villains could pop up within this game. And to move on with the interview once again actually does relate to another important question, which is in the regards of whether or not the game will have enough depth when you are playing as all these separate characters. So again, the interviewer states these mechanics are simple at first glance, but is there sufficient depth to satisfy the most experienced players? And as Scott Amos responds, "Sure, we want everyone to be able to get closer to the game since a large share of the public has approached the Marvel Universe over the last few years, but also to allow the most demanding to study what is the best way to build or play the various heroes. Lovers of min-maxing will get their teeth right." So basically, there is going to be a plethora of upgrades to dive into like we did see within the overview video, which will increase different stats depending on your character's playstyle. And alongside of that, you'll also be able to unlock new combo moves to take out enemies with, as well as new special moves, defense abilities, and so on. And even though I personally think as of right now, based on the footage that we have seen, that the combat does look a bit bare bones, I do hope that the overall amount of depth once you start fully upgrading your character will be extremely expanded by the time you are finished with said hero. So fingers crossed that the amount of skills that you can use as each separate Avenger is as fully detailed and realized as they are making it out to be. But what I find the most important within this interview interview is a couple of interesting confirmation points from Scott Amos himself, mainly relating to the game's possibly changing storyline. And as the interviewer states, will there be choices that players can take? What impact will they have? And as Scott Amos surprisingly states, yes, there will be, although I can't reveal much about it. History will have fixed points, initial and intermediate, but otherwise ... And to expand upon that a bit more, mainly relating to an aspect which I was not expecting to be inputted within Marvel's Avengers in the slightest, is where the interviewer asks, can we hope for alternative endings? And as Scott Amos shockingly states, there will be alternative endings, yes. And in any case, the credits will not be the end. The contents we will publish in the months following the launch will continue to expand the experience. Now, the only other major Marvel game that I can fondly remember to have this type of alternate ending feature be inputted within it is none other than Spider-Man Web of Shadows. However, it did make total sense for that game to have different endings because you could take the either extremely good path within the red suit or the more evil path within the black suit. So it already seems like they have a base storyline planned out for what the narrative of Marvel's Avengers is going to be, but the fact that there's going to be apparently alternate endings just makes it a bit weird for me personally. It could be rather interesting to replay through the base game over and over again to try and get different endings, but I would have just preferred a main storyline from their own unique narrative that they are telling. So hopefully we do get a bit more information about this aspect within the game sooner rather than later, because I do really want to learn more about this before the game releases. But to finalize the article with a few statements from the interviewer himself, which I do completely agree with, is that Marvel's Avengers has a very interesting potential on its side, and the component that can allow it to take that extra step compared to other games of the genre is certainly the multiplayer mode. If the possibilities of customization of the heroes will allow in all respects to vary greatly the composition of the teams, communicating to the players the feeling of having created their own Avengers, then the next title of Crystal Dynamics, which for some time seems to need to experiment in something other than the Tomb Raider saga, could hold more than one surprise. The hope is that the developers will not indulge in certain likenesses from games as a service that we have witnessed in recent months. The limited number of heroes to begin with is fine, provided that each of these can count on sufficient depth, thus avoiding the user's need to wait for some updates, too many, before they can play a truly complete product. The potentials are all there, the ideas seem good, and the attention around all that is registered with Marvel is obviously skyrocketing. All that remains is to wait for May 2020 to be able to reunite the Avengers again and see what they are made of. And with all that thoroughly said, everyone, that is the video I have for you today, and please let me know all your thoughts in the comment section down below. What do you think about this extremely informative interview, and what is your take on possible alternate endings to be featured within Marvel's Avengers? Again, for me personally, it would make complete sense if there was some type of good/bad karma meter within the game like that of Web of Shadows, but it does seem like this is going to be a pretty straightforward story. So even though I am a bit confused as to why alternate endings would actually be featured within a game like the Avengers project, I am very interested to see what they are going to fully entail once we do learn more details about them. And until that time comes, everyone, thank you all so much for watching, stay merry Marvelites, and peace out.
Cap was murdered!
You think I don't know that? I've replayed that day in my head 1,000 times. Guess what? No one cares. The world needed someone to blame, and he gave them their scapegoat. So, unless you have some kind of astounding proof, I suggest you both get off my land. What is that?
Proof.